Well, hello. And it's time for, is it episode 11 or episode 10? Or is it episode 9? I forget. I think I don't remember. I'll look it up. It's either 9 or 10, I think. Lost track. But it is Good Friday. It's also Passover. The second weekend of Passover. It's the Sabbath. And so, Shabbat Shalom. Happy Good Friday. And see, we get a whole deal about it's like, was it actually a Thursday? A lot of people believe it was actually a Thursday that Jesus crucified on. Regardless, regardless of like what's happened in the church, paganized Christianity, we know this is what's happened in the church. Well, you see, talking about my testimony portion, I want to talk about something because it pertains to what happened this week at Florida State. Yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of Kris Bryant debuting with the Cubs. It just coincided with, I don't think it was a coincidence. I'll get into what I think might be going on. With regards to what happened at Florida State, it was also Lee Corso was in the news, and it's the day before Good Friday, and when I think about it, I think it was Thursday that Jesus was crucified. But besides that, the point I want to talk about how I became a Cubs fan. Why I talk about sports, because it was a big part of my life growing up. I played sports, but I watched sports. Big part of my life. My childhood. And you see, I remember going to a game. First game I went to was back in 1983. I think it was my grandma, my mom, my brother, and myself. I think we, if I remember, went to a game at Wrigley Field. My grandma, she was a diehard Cubs fan. She was a card-carrying diehard Cubs fan since 1936. And see, in 1983 is also the year my grandfather passed away. Now, I want to say that was in the fall. So this game we went to was in the summer. And see, I was watching the Cubs on TV. They weren't very good, but I became a Cubs fan after going to my first game at Wrigley. I was mesmerized by that place when it was the Cubs played the Dodgers and they won the game. Bill Buckner drove in 2 runs on a base hit up the middle. That's when I became a Bill Buckner fan. And yeah, he was my favorite player. Now in 1983, like I said, my brother was a Sox fan, and his favorite player was Harold Baines. And Harold, you'd always annoy me with that. But the White Sox actually won their division. That's when they were playing at Comiskey Park. And see, never went to the original Comiskey Park. I don't know if I would have been a Sox fan if I would have gone to Comiskey Park instead of going to Wrigley. I don't know. If my grandma was more of a Sox fan instead of a Cubs fan, just saying, probably be a Sox fan. But because, well, it's simple. We went to Wrigley Field. I think we took the train, if I remember how it went. Took the train, and then we went to see my dad's office. And then we got on the L, I want to say. It had to be what happened. And yeah, because of Wrigley. And I watched the Cubs on Channel 9, Harry Carey. I mean, that was kind of my childhood. Come back from school, flip on Channel 9, watch the Cubs. And, of course, in 1984, see, my grandfather passed away I think it was the fall of 1983. In 1984, that's when the Cubs had, won their division. And, the Cubs-White Sox rivalry always seemed kind of silly to me when I think about it. Because it's like Sox would always, they thought they're the real Chicago baseball fans. It's like they'd always ridicule Cubs fans because, Cubs fans would go to the games when they were good. Sox fans thought they were better fans because they didn't go to the games. Kind of twisted thinking when I think about it. It's like Cubs were known as lovable losers. Well, the White Sox weren't really much better. Sox fans would say in the 90s, we had the best record in the 90s except for the Braves. Yeah. How many times you get to the postseason? It's like, how did that work when you didn't get to the postseason? You got the postseason a couple times. Well, actually, just the one time in 93. In 94, they have a case, that people would talk about that year. But, I'll point to multiple Cubs seasons, 2003, 1984, where they might have been the best team in baseball. And postseason, you never know what's going to happen. So then the White Sox win the World Series in 2005. And Sox fans were kind of, smug in their attitude. We got ours. And I'm just thinking, that's it. That's it. You just want one. So when the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, I was hoping for more just for that reason. It's hard to build a dynasty in baseball. Well, and then in Chicago, really hard, I think. With two teams, I think that's what makes it really hard, actually, to build a dynasty. Even though Chicago's a big city, look at New York, but New York's much bigger, The Yankees. The Mets are, but they've been to multiple World Series, won multiple World Series, more so than the Cubs and Sox combined. The Mets have only been around since 1962, so it's kind of like, yeah, Cubs and Sox fans have not much to talk, when it comes to, like, championships, but, it's like, the new Wrigley Field is kind of like, think about Wrigley Field today compared to what it was before. I mean, today's Wrigley Field feels like it's a new stadium. And that's fine. As I see it, I have no problem with it. But there was nothing like going to Wrigley back in the day when it was what it was. When it was like kind of that memory. Of course, you go to the bathrooms, it's kind of a joke, It is. But it's like no one goes to a baseball game to go to the bathroom. But today it's a different. It's like a new age mindset. It's not the same as it used to be. You know, um, I can't just shake my head when I think about it. Maybe I'm like turning into a grumpy old man, in that regard. But it's like, I don't know. Point is like, what does this have to do with my testimony with regards to my faith? Well, I think sports. Look, there are certain players I looked up to uh, that had strong Christian faith. Um, John Smoltz was someone I think about. Trying to think of others. A lot of baseball players, actually. What was his name? He had cancer, actually. For the pitcher for the Giants. I'm trying to think of his name. I think he lost his arm, actually. But he never lost. Of course, he would talk about his faith. And, that's the thing about sports is like, can you be living that life and be a Christian? Well, yeah, I think I think so. And then you think about like this college football season. You had two quarterbacks, both professing Christians. Riley Leonard and Will Howard. Is it Will Howard? For the quarterback for Ohio State. It's like Tim Tebow would be someone who was ridiculed for professing his faith. Well, I mean, thing you have to watch out for is how just be careful not to be a hypocrite. That's why it's very you gotta like choose the times. When to talk about it. It's one of those things. That's why I do my channel. I feel like this is the best time for me to discuss these things because, well, in a work environment, things get said. I'll say this without outing anybody. Things do get said in a work environment, and the best thing to do is, like, in my view, not say anything. Some people would like want to start pointing the finger and blah blah blah, and it's like, yeah, just let that hang a little bit because sometimes the spirit of the Lord, the spirit of truth, will kind of work its way in and actually give. To me, that's when you yield to the Spirit at that point. That's just what I think regarding that. And so, when you're talking about sports, it's like, and it's like, think about like what's going on with conference realignment in college sports. There's a lot of dung being flung around, regarding that. And before I get into what happened yesterday, I feel the need to just, someone posted something and this is what is written. It's week 27 of being told by content creators that the new Pac-12 media deal announcement is days away, which is kind of funny. But then this is said. Justin Watkins talked Cofield and Co. about the latest rumors, news, plus where he thinks UNLV stands in the Pac Mountain West mix. Now, I had a report because I listened to this podcast, and it's like there's still this thought that UNLV could end up in the Pac, because there's talk about a $12 to $15 million media deal, and I'm like, I don't really see that personally. I don't think that the Mount West is going to get higher deal than the Pac, but I also think that the Pac has messed things up. I think there's a lot of pride and arrogance on that side, and they can't possibly be rewarded. I mean, they might be, but I wouldn't feel good if I were an NIU fan. I wouldn't feel good about my prospects in the Pac right now because of some of what's being said. I'm in the Mountain West. Let me just read what I wrote. I love how people frame these conversations who talk like they know based on one person's information but ignore other information. Are they aware that UNLV and Air Force have been guaranteed millions by the Mountain West to stay? And it's just, I got the information from an AP article. I know I bust on the AP, but it's credible information. Now, the point I'm trying to make is, I talk about sports because, well, it's part of my upbringing. It's a part of my childhood. I grew up watching the sports, and you can't separate that. It's like, you just can't just completely divorce yourself from that. Because it's like also my music. I can't completely separate myself from the music. It's a part of, people want to talk about like being a born again Christian, you have to throw away all your past. It's like, no, you have to die to yourself, meaning the sinful nature of yourself, as I see it, is what you really have to die to. Following sports isn't sin. Playing sports isn't sin. That's twisted nonsense, I think, a lot from that I get, that I think some people, it's like, it's of the world. People say, we're not of the world. Well, yes, we're not of this world. This is not our home, but we are in the world. And, we do things that the world does. It doesn't mean we are to just completely separate ourselves, isolate ourselves from, no. We don't integrate with the world's ways of doing things. No. That's why I talk about what's going on with conference realignment, because I don't like a lot of because it's not, a lot of it is pointing the finger, saying, there's a lot of what I see from the Pac heads in particular that really bothers me. A lot of slanderous stuff said about the Mountain West commissioner. And I don't slander Teresa Gold in the way, I don't call her greedy. The way that Mountain West calls Gloria Navarro's greedy. All she's doing is her job, trying to keep the conference at its highest level possible. Why would you just let UNLV? It's like I pointed this out too. Yeah, the Cubs, they played a crazy game today too. Speaking of that, 13-11 and 21 runs were scored by both teams in the 7th and 8th inning, and Arizona scored 10 runs in the 8th inning. Crazy. And they still lost the game. It's hilarious. Let's see here. Where is it? I want to get into that a little bit, but hold on. Yeah, I'll get into that. Okay. I think the Pac made a mistake with taking Utah State and Colorado State. They should have gotten UNLV instead of Colorado State in the first wave, and Air Force football only instead of Utah State. New Mexico would have been a better choice over Utah State. I think this is what should have happened. I'm trying to be realistic. Look, Pac is not going to be a power league. But if they wanted to get the best media deal possible, UNLV should have been the first wave with Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State. That's what should have happened. Should have been the first wave, and then instead of Utah State and Colorado State, I would have gone with Air Force football only and New Mexico. New Mexico is, in my view, better media value than both Colorado State and Utah State. They're the flagship university in New Mexico in a big market. Utah State, the main flagship is Utah. And then you got BYU to deal with. And Logan is an hour and a half, almost 2 hours away from Salt Lake. Fort Collins, kind of the same thing. It's a bigger town, but do they have better media value than Air Force? Maybe for basketball, not football. I would argue they don't have as good a media value. Their brand is not as good in football, not in football. And to me, if football is driving the media value, you've got to go with the better media brands, the better football brands. New Mexico, I think, is a better, bigger media value for sure than Utah State. On par with Colorado State. For that reason, it's like, because you got Air Force, you go with New Mexico instead of Colorado State. And then for basketball, you get Gonzaga and GCU. Now you got a conference. And then you might even go get one other football out of Texas. You go into Texas, and UTSA at that point is a possibility, because instead of going after Memphis, you're not going to get Memphis. They're not traveling to Corvallis and Pullman. UTSA, better chance. They're already a little further west. They're in Central Time Zone. Good media market. Their football brand they're building up their football brand. To me, that would have been the route to go to get them. The Mountain West, UTEP and New Mexico State. And then they get UC Davis. You got 9 schools. They might get a SoCal school, UC Irvine for basketball. You got 8 schools. Set up a scheduling agreement with UC Davis, so you can have them on your schedule. You work out. You can schedule some of the PAC schools. Both, it would benefit both conferences, in that regard. PAC would get higher media deal. Still not a power conference, but they would get a higher media deal. And so, all I'm trying to say is, the PAC went about it the wrong way. And they're arrogant. They're being arrogant about it. They think that Mount West is full of nonsense. Their arrogance is blinding regardless of what their media deal is, it would have been higher. Anybody with common sense, UNLV, Air Force, New Mexico, gives them higher media value than Utah State and Colorado State. Gives them overall higher media value. And the Mount West still could exist in that scenario. You're not depleting the Mount West. Utah State, because you're in the state of Utah, but it's not driving. It's not the main driving force for Salt Lake City. Utah and BYU. See, NIU, it's a bigger media market. NIU has a smaller share of Chicago compared to Notre Dame, compared to, I don't know though, Northwestern. See, U of I and Notre Dame are both outside the media market. NIU could potentially get more media value than Northwestern, because Northwestern, I'm sorry, they're just not very good. Notre Dame will get more media value than NIU. Will always have more media value. If you have to go, though, between Northwestern, U of I, and NIU, that's a different conversation, if you ask me. Who gets the highest media value? I think it'll depend on which team is winning the most. And if NIU is in the Mountain West, a better conference than the MAC, they're going to be on TV more frequently, on national TV more frequently. They might get better numbers than Northwestern, U of I. I don't think they'll get better numbers than Notre Dame, but I think they could get better numbers than both Northwestern and U of I. And all of a sudden, the Big Ten's going to start wondering, no, you know what's going to happen? The ACC or the Big 12. If NIU has consistently better numbers than U of I and Northwestern, which could happen. U of I with Brett Bielema, that won't necessarily happen. Although Brett Bielema, there's a reason he hasn't stayed in one place. He went to Wisconsin and then went to Arkansas, and now he's at U of I. There's a reason he only lasts so long at these places. We'll see what happens. The point I'm trying to make is, it matters. Conduct matters. In sports, you kind of learn. You do learn lessons of conduct, good conduct. Unfortunately, I think what goes on with this NIL stuff, if you follow the Nico, I'm a leaving Tennessee situation, and apparently I've seen a report that the UCLA deal isn't even done. That's a bad look for. That might be good news for college football in this NIL deal, because if he can't get a deal, this will alter the tune of a lot of these players wanting to leave. And you say, well, he wanted to leave because of the offense. Yeah, that's the family trying to save face. I'm sorry, I don't believe that. There was nothing. I didn't hear anything about him complaining about the offense. I think the father overplayed his hand. I blame more of the father, the family, than the kid. Because if the father had any kind of understanding of negotiating, he would have realized who's out there? He would have been talking to other people in the industry, asking them instead of just saying we're gonna leave him. I'm like, it's in one sense it's good news for college football because I think less of these will happen as a result. Last year you had the situation with the UNLV player. Well, see, that's a kid getting bad advice, in my opinion. He left Holy Cross, I think, right? I think it was Holy Cross to go to UNLV. And now he's, the latest I've heard, James Madison. Is that where he is? Just saying, it's pretty freaking ridiculous. So, just that's why I talk. It's like, well, what does this have to do with like the gospel? Well, sports have been around forever. The Olympics were played in ancient days. Paul references sports in his epistles. The real issue is, in sports you kind of learn good conduct, but at the same time you also learn ways of the world, which to me is a problem when understanding the kingdom of God, for example. First shall be last and last shall be first. Kingdom of God is not about competition. No, it's Jesus, he's the one who won the prize, so to speak, when he died and rose again. So we don't have to, make it to heaven via merit. The kingdom of heaven is not a meritocracy. Whereas, I guess the point I want to make is, what I've seen in sports, particularly in college sports, is a desire to take away that meritocracy. Well, that's a delusion. To remove the meritocracy out of sports, because that's kind of what's happened with conference realignment in one sense. The SEC and the Big Ten, they kind of want to quarantine themselves away from schools that are trying to get to a higher level. And to me, that's a delusion. I don't know if that's not the strong delusion, but it certainly is a delusion to quarantine itself away from. And so that's where the gospel comes in, because look, it doesn't matter how gifted you are. What matters is, do you accept what Jesus did for you? You don't have to win the gold medal to get into heaven. just have to yield to the Spirit. Crazy game. And so I want to talk now. I do want to talk about the situation that occurred. Kris Bryant, okay, 10 years ago, debuted for the Cubs. Yesterday. 10 years ago, yesterday. Also, what happened yesterday, and there is a connection to NIU. Lee Corso announced his retirement from ESPN yesterday. It just so happened, is that a coincidence that he chose to do that on the 10-year anniversary? Was he a Cubs fan? I mean, he's from Cicero, I guess. Let's see. Lee Corso, I want to say, he, in his playing career, he went to Florida State. He was a quarterback and cornerback. Interesting. 1953 and 1957. He was born in Cicero, Illinois. Now, he was a coach, grad assistant at Florida State, 1958. And then he was a quarterback coach at Maryland, 1959 and 1965. And then he was a defensive back coach at Navy. Interesting. 1968 to 1968. 1966 to 68. He was then head coach at Louisville from 1969 to 1972. And then he was the head coach at Indiana from 1973 to 1982. 1983, he was not in coaching. And then 1984 was the same year the Cubs won their division. See, that's why I wonder about things. Because Kris Bryant started his career 10 years ago to the day yesterday, and Lee Corso announces his retirement. He was a coach at NIU in 1984. Well, yesterday, where Lee Corso went to school, there was a shooting. Now, like I said, Kris Bryant debuted 10 years ago that day. I think he's playing for the Rockies now. At least I know he has been playing for the Rockies for the last few seasons. I'm trying to remember where he was traded to. I don't know if it was Colorado or somewhere else. But see, shooting yesterday at Florida State, right? And there's video. Pretty surreal, actually. Let's see. Okay. What happened 17 years ago, February 14th? NIU shooting, right? Kris Bryant's number is 17. It was April 17 yesterday. Well, see, 10 years after that event, February 14, 2018. February 14, 2008 was when the NIU shooting happened. February 14, 2018 was the Parkland shooting. You know, there was, I just read something. find it. Yep. This is according to the New York Post. Some students at FSU shooting are Parkland massacre survivors. Victim's dad says, America is broken. A father whose child was murdered in the Parkland High School shooting revealed that several of his daughter's surviving classmates were at Florida State University when a gunman opened fire on students here Thursday. Fred Gutenberg, Wright, speaks during a school safety roundtable Monday, November 20, 2023, Coral Springs, Florida. So there were some Parkland survivors at Florida State yesterday. And like I said, 10 years to the day after the NIU shootings when the Parkland shooting happened. Kris Bryant, of course, yesterday, 10 years today, debuted his career with the Cubs. Now, you know who went to the Parkland High School? Anthony Rizzo, the teammate of Kris Bryant. There's more to this because when the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, days before what happened, Trump became president. And see, okay, when did Kris Bryant start his career? April 17, 2015. Just happens to be 60 days before Trump announced running for president. Let's see, it was like around Memorial Day when Dennis Hastert was arrested. Of course, Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the House, he got his master's at NIU. His district, NIU was in his district. All I'm saying is there's more going on than we're privy to. I just report these facts, and you know, people want to say that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. He's the man of lawlessness. He's spreading fear and all this. Well, this stuff has been going on forever. It's just starting to come to light. You know, as far as like how all this interacts and interfaces, interchanges with it, you know, all these events. There's a spiritual component to all this, and you know, our battle is not against flesh and blood; it's against wicked spirits in high places and principalities and all this stuff. And people want to attribute certain things to people and personalities and all this, but they don't dig into actually what is going on, what might be going on, what might be going on. We are in an age of deception. The spirit of Antichrist is real. Is Donald Trump the Antichrist? He's the president, so he must be. He could be an Antichrist figure. But, you know, he represents. But see, God, in the same way that, you know, kings in biblical times represented like King Nebuchadnezzar. Think about King Nebuchadnezzar. Perfect prime example. There's a time when he was a definite Antichrist figure. But then there was another time when he was a representative of God on earth. So it cuts both ways as I see it. It depends. It depends on the individual. It depends on where their heart is. And sometimes God hardens, like it talks, God hardens the heart of Pharaoh. Right? There are other times when Pharaoh represents, like King Cyrus is another one. Trump has been compared to King Cyrus. King Cyrus was responsible for rebuilding of the temple. So if Trump wants to rebuild the third temple, does that make him an Antichrist figure? I say no. You know why? Because if Cyrus was commissioned by God to rebuild the temple, Trump may be commissioned by God to do the same thing. The difference is, Jesus already came around, and he was the perfect sacrifice, and there's really no need for a temple. But what's the issue? The Jews. The stone that became the cornerstone was rejected. By the Jews. Oh, you're an anti-Semite for saying that. Well, no, that's the truth. The Jews reject him. They still do. Oh, there's Messianic. That's a minority. The overwhelming majority of Jews reject Jesus. Now, we could talk about, are these real Jews? Are they of the line of Shem? I don't think it matters. There are the so-called Jews, the synagogue of Satan. We'll get a whole deal of that. I kind of wonder if that's the Freemasons. But, that gets a whole deal. The point is, the Jews who reject Jesus in the eyes of God, they're cut off. And that's why the Gentiles, that's why, people talk about Israel's replacement theology and all that. Dispensationalism and all that. It's like, no. What it is, okay, God's chosen people would be viewed as the church in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, the Jews, who would be God's chosen people, the stone that became the cornerstone was rejected by the Jews. They built the kingdom of God in Israel. But once Jesus showed up, the Son of God, the Son of Man, and why is Jesus referred to as the Son of Man? You know why I think? Because Adam was created in the perfect image of God. He was perfect, like God. But then he fell. Well, Jesus is the son of that perfect image. The irony, so is Adam. Think about that for a while. Well, then David goes, my Lord said to my Lord and all that. It's like, it's very, what's going on there. But see, the issue at hand is Jesus shows up and the Jews reject him. And so the Gentiles, that's where there is early debate about whether or not the gospel should be preached to the Gentiles. Well, Paul did it. And that's really how the church was built. Now, what's happened over time? Denominations, right? Different denominations. Well, it started early. Constantine. He accepted Christ, and he decided to make Christianity the state religion of Rome. But then he built a city, now today known as Istanbul, Constantinople. And that's where the Eastern Orthodox Church basically broke away from what is now known as the Roman Catholic Church. And see, what's the real issue, as I see it? Well, a lot of pagan idolatry was accepted. Because they moved Jesus' birth to Christmas apart from the biblical feasts, and that, if you're a Jew, you have every right to be kind of saying, yeah, that proves that Jesus is not the real deal. I would say, hold on though. What if Christians recognize that the feasts in the Old Testament are actually the feasts of the Lord? That's not a strong delusion. Here's the thing. There's a caveat to this. You can't force Gentiles to follow the Mosaic Law unless they want to. I think, Ten Commandments. I go back to the Ten Commandments. I'm like, adultery, idolatry. Yeah. Lying, stealing, coveting. Yeah, we shouldn't be doing any of that. And observing the true Sabbath, Saturday. Remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. It wasn't moved to Sunday. No, that's paganism. No, Paul talks about not doing as the pagans do. You can see that in Scripture all over the place. Come on, and that's what's happened. And so that's why Jews today. But see, I would ask, what's going on in Israel? I'd be like, what's going on in Israel isn't really legit either. The Rothschilds, the Khazarian Jews, the political Jews, they're not real Jews. Come on. See, this is part of the discussion that needs to be had. These aren't, you're anti-Semite. You know what the term Semite means? Anti-Semite, anti-Shem. Shemic. Shem. Shem. Noah had 3 sons. He had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And in order, I think Shem, Japheth, and Ham. The political Zionists, the Ashkenazi Jews, were likely of the line of Japheth, because Japheth had a son named Ashkenaz. And so my take is that's your political Zionists of today. They're not real. They're not Shem. They're not of the line of Shem. So I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm pro What is the truth? Okay. Let's go into the scriptures now. This week's Torah study is called Shemini. And the scriptures for this week is Leviticus 9 to 11. The prophets section is 2 Samuel 6, 1 to 15, Isaiah 65, 1 to 8, 66, 15 to 18, Jeremiah 7, 21 to 8, 3, 9, 22 to 24. In the New Testament, it's Mark 7, 1 to 23, 9, 2 to 13, Acts 5, 1 to 11, 10 to 11, 18, 15, 19 to 21, 2 Corinthians 6, 14 to 7, 1, Galatians 2, 11 to 16, Hebrews 7, 1 to 8, 6, 1 Peter 1, 14 to 16. Go to, I'll post a link, to this particular study. And let me play the quick summary of this Torah portion.
Shalom and welcome to Parsha in 60 seconds. Today's portion is from Leviticus 9:1 through 11:47. It is called Shemini, which means eighth. After ordaining the priest, they made sacrifices. Then the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people, and fire consumed the sacrifices. The people were awestruck. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, decided to improvise and offered unholy fire, and God's fire incinerated them. Their bodies were placed outside the camp. Aaron and his cousins were not to mourn or leave the tent of meeting. God tells Aaron that he and his remaining sons were not to drink wine or other intoxicants when they entered the tent of meeting, keeping it holy, or they would die. The priests and their families ate their portion from the sacrifice. Moses questioned Aaron after discovering Eleazar and Ithamar had already sacrificed and burnt their sin offering. Aaron gave an answer which satisfied Moses. And that is Shemini in 60 seconds.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting because it's second weekend of Passover, and this deals with sacrifices, but then you hear about the story of let me go to let's see, we can find these individuals, Nadab and Abihu. They took either of them his censer and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them. Well, there's a story that parallels this, is actually in the New Testament portion about one second here. Ananias and Sapphira. And it was a husband and wife, and they withheld their portion of the offering. And because they there's different takes on it, because they weren't honest about it. That's why God struck them dead, both of them. I think it's more true with the wife. Although then Peter said unto her, let's see, and it was about the space of 3 hours after, when his wife, not knowing what was done, came in. And Peter answered unto her, Tell me whether ye sold the land for so much. And she said, Yea, for so much. Then Peter said unto her, How is it that ye have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which hath buried thy husband are at the door, and shall carry thee out. Uh, the point is I don't. This story is kind of one of those mysteries, but it does seem to be a throwback to what happened in the Old Testament with um, where is it? No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm trying to find the names. Yeah, not Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron. That they did what was unauthorized. And see, I see this going on today. I do kind of wonder if what's going on with the deep state, if they're doing these things that are unauthorized in the eyes of God. They may think they're serving the Most High, doing what they're doing. Because, well, they worship Satan. That's the issue. They think they're worshiping God. But, well, that gets into, like, the Vatican, like the Pope. Is he worshiping the Most High, or is he worshiping Satan? A lot of what goes on with like the Jesuits and the they call themselves the Society of Jesus, for example. That might be what's going on here, for real. And when I see some of this witchcraft, as I see it, with Lee Corso announces, his retirement, and then the same day you see the bang bang going on. It's like, are these people that foolish? They think that they're carrying out God's mission when God's not authorizing them to do that. That I wonder if that's what's going on. If people in their minds, you hear about people doing stuff like that. They think they're doing it in the name of the Lord, but it's like God's like, nah, I didn't have you do that. I'm not saying for you to do that. So it gets me a whole deal, like the whole MK Ultra program that's been going on. I think gets people twisted into thinking they're carrying out God's plan. I think that's what's going on. They think, they have to do something. They have to I got to do something. It's like when Joe Biden was in Elk Grove Village. Did they do that because they thought some crazy guy would come with a gun? Like, that's what in a lot of cases, I think that's what's going on with these shootings. It's just people somewhere in their head, they think that God is telling them to do this. But God's like, no, that wasn't me. That's in your head, or I do believe that there are demonic forces that would feed this information to people to do that. And so that's ultimately what I think is going on. Now, I want to share another scripture here that I think is important to understand. Where is it? I'll find it. Here. Yes, this is. I want to share this. This is important. Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord. So that's kind of the point. You know, to really understand the scriptures, you have to understand, like, what is the purpose of all these sacrifices in Leviticus, that's mentioned in Leviticus, and it's all ultimately to get to that place where it's like the fruits of the Spirit, ultimately. Because that's what this is. You know, when we see that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth, for in these things I delight, saith the Lord. It's really getting to what the fruits of the Spirit are. You know, and it's like you do the sacrifices, like the Israelites were doing the sacrifices mostly. Well, they were food offerings, pleasing aroma toward the Lord. You know, it goes back to actually what Cain and Abel. You know, Cain's sacrifice wasn't bad. It was basically a grain offering, whereas Abel's sacrifice was a meat offering, and it was a pleasing aroma to the Lord, basically. Cain was mad that he didn't think his sacrifice was good enough. But see, Cain was twisted. That's really what's going on there. You know, Cain was jealous. And so ultimately, what is this about? You know, the offerings, it's not so much about the offering itself. It's about, are you doing it for yourself, to get satisfaction for yourself, or doing it to satisfy? That's what it's about. At the end of the day, it's not about getting something out of it for yourself. It's one of the issues I had with the prosperity movement. It's one of that is the issue I had, because I think what they do is they do what they want out of getting something in return, and they preach this. They say, yeah, because then God has to do, instead of doing something out of the kindness of your heart, because you want to do it to please the other person. You want to do it to please God. You just want to do that to please God. You're not looking for anything. You want to please God. That's what it's about. That's what's when it's like when you think about it, it's like, why did Jesus die on the cross? It's Good Friday. Why did Jesus die on the cross? Why? He had to. Why? Because our sin is so decrepit. I can't do anything to please God. Because, our righteousness is filthy rags. There's nothing I can do. I need that. I say, what saves me is the what Jesus did at the cross. Nothing I can do. I can make these videos, but these videos are nothing. It's what Jesus did at the cross that matters. I accept that. And I believe in my heart God raised him from the dead. And see, that's what it has to be understood here. It's like Cain was upset because he didn't think his offering was good enough. He was jealous that Abel did an offering God preferred more. Well, why not then try to outdo that, instead of kill your brother? Why not do the same thing? If that's what pleases God, you know what pleases God, so then you do that. What? Why kill your brother? If your brother did something that why kill your brother? If your brother did something that pleased God, why'd you kill him? Just go leave it at that.
Goodbye, Toledo.